females at JSE listed companies. And we've got 32% of senior management positions, which are held by women. So definitely the smaller portion, and the lion's share still being held by men. On top of that, you've got women who are doing on average 7.7 hours, so nearly 8 hours a day. That's almost a full-time job over and above their actual work that they're spending on unpaid work during the pandemic. Laundry, dishes, cooking, raising kids, doing homework, whatever it might be, nearly 8 hours a day, an additional full-time job over and above that, which explains really why we have so few women in executive positions. How do you get there if you're balancing, or you're constantly struggling with this balancing act? And then we have 2 out of 3 jobs that were lost during the pandemic were jobs that were held by females. And that's frightening. Okay, so we know that we've had unprecedented levels of job losses in this past year and a bit. And unfortunately, the majority of those jobs lost were jobs that were held by females. On the international front, just 8% of Fortune 500 companies have female CEOs. That's under 10%, just 8%. Better than South Africa, but still not ideal. We've got 8% of executive board positions are filled by women. And fortunately, the one industry making strides in improving this gap is the financial services industry, making the fastest progress at improving the gender gap that we see internationally. Looking at family responsibility, and I can say this, and maybe not in my home, I should be very fair to my dad and the men in my life, but nowhere in the world is there an equal amount of unpaid work that's done by men and women. Okay, and that is quite frightening. So women are by far and by large doing the majority of the unpaid work in households. And as a result of that, we spend 10 years less in the workforce. And we've got 32% of women in South Africa are single-handedly rearing children. Okay, this is just adding to this picture of why, maybe we need more women in leadership positions guiding the growth of women in society in general. So 32% of women raising children single-handedly. And then to top that, even when women are raising children in a joint family, you've got women who are 4 times more likely to stay home and care for a sick child. So the family responsibility element cannot be understated. When you've got the social inequality, you've got 55% of the world's unbanked adults are women. Basically, 55% of everyone who doesn't have a bank account in the world is a female. It's disproportionate, and it's completely unfortunate. The gender gap that currently exists in terms of this unbanked population, women who have no access to financial products or financial services, would take 138 years from now, not within any of our lifetimes on this call, unless you have some potion you need to tell me about that can stop me from aging. But the gender gap is literally going to take 138 years from now to close. And it just seems unreal. So despite us making progress, that number is still alarming. Just last year, when the World Economic Forum did the study, that gap was sitting at 99 years. So still something within reach, but we've crossed since the pandemic has started. And you can see from the statistics that have come out of the pandemic that this has become a larger gap than what we saw pre the pandemic. We've got women who are less in a less fortunate position to retire. So they have up to 40% less money in retirement. And that's another issue, a socioeconomic issue. And South Africa, we cannot forget this. South Africa is ranked 131 out of 156 countries for wage equality. So just to frame why discussions like these are important, I thought to put these statistics on the screen and just to contextualize, why are we here? Why are we having these conversations? Why do we feel that there is a need for a conversation like this? And I'm hoping that this has framed the discussion quite nicely. Now, we're here to represent an organization, an association called the Directors Association. And their mission statement is to develop knowledgeable, competent, and ethical directors who can effectively serve on boards. Okay, and you're going to wonder, what this has to do with the entire picture that I've just shown you, but we're going to get there through a question and answer session in a bit. But that is important, to develop knowledgeable, competent, and ethical directors who can effectively serve on boards. And through their Madam Chair initiative, what they're trying to do is build a pipeline of board-ready female directors. And this, we feel, is going to have the greatest impact, them being female, so bringing a diverse outlook on board readiness. And then, of course, having the board readiness from an academic and a professional perspective being brought into the picture. So this is the Directors Association's mission. And it's very, very strongly aligned with my general passions when it comes to talking about empowerment, regardless of who you are, male, female, racial, anything across the board. It is really to bring across a diverse set of people into leadership positions. So with us today, we've got an incredibly impressive person. She is truly an inspiration to me, Dr. Musima Mabunda. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about her before she speaks. Dr. Musima is a business leader, a physician, a feminist at heart, and a change agent. And she's the head of wellness at Discovery Vitality. She's responsible for developing innovative wellness programs to fulfill Discovery's core purpose and to make its members healthy, as well as driving thought leadership and research agendas for the company. But before joining Discovery, and this is what's just so impressive, Dr. Mabunda acquired extensive health industry experience, both in South Africa and the UK. Notable roles during her professional journey include an assistant product development director at Roche UK, head of wellness at Momentum Metropolitan Holdings, management consultant at McKinsey & Company, and most recently, associate director in Accenture's health business. Contributing to the discourse and progress at the intersection of business and health is a passion for Dr. Musima. And to that end, Dr. Mabunda sits on the boards of Population Services International, the PSI, the Student Sponsorship Program, SSP, and Indlela, an organization focusing on the optimal use of behavioral insights to improve health outcomes in society. Dr. Mabunda also holds an MBA from the University of Oxford and has a medical degree from the University of Cape Town. So, Doctor, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. It's an incredible pleasure to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's actually an honor to be having this conversation with you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Doctor. So let's get right into it. And I see that our chat is quite busy. And I'll get to that too. I'm not much of a multitasker, so I will get to the chat towards the end, if that's okay. But I'd like to maybe pose a few questions. So how are we going to do this as the committee that's responsible for professionalism of directorship? We are introducing a topic today of diversity, diverse boards, and professionalism. And what does diversity really mean? So, Doctor, on the back of this topic, what is your why? Why have you chosen to pursue directorship?
So for me, Cash, I think about this in three ways, right? What I've found is you gain skills that are not only valuable in your immediate roles, but those skills actually have much bigger impact, and you can reach a lot more people by applying them in a different context. And in this particular instance, that's in a board. So part of my why is actually the more tenured you become in the corporate world or in life, the more you realize that skills can actually be applied across multiple contexts. So that ability to actually contribute my skills broadly than my current role allows was a definite part of the why, because then that expands my impact. The second element for me that drives the why is I love learning. I completely, absolutely love learning. So the beauty about being in a board, which is a context different to my everyday, is knowledge brokering. I get to expose myself to a different context, and that expands my knowledge. Completely being with someone in a different industry is learning in itself. if you understand what you do as a board member and contributing to drive the business strategic direction, and making sure that the shareholder value is realized, you also learn that in a different setting. So that for me is fascinating. And I've also just enjoyed learning new and different ways of how other people and how other organizations achieve outcomes. And that ultimately feeds back into the role that you do. So it almost like you just grow exponentially. And the third element for me is, and I'm trying to reflect my age, I would still like to believe I'm very young, but I've started thinking about something that is called retirement. It is going to come. And when it does, what I've seen, what inspires me from people that I've seen that are retired is they continue to remain economically active. They continue to remain relevant because we know the world is not constant, right? And being a member is a powerful way not only to contribute and to grow a business that you're participating in, but it's a new way to learn. Imagine if you are 70 years old, you are a board member. In your heydays as an executive, there was no digital technology. Right now, as a board member, you are going to be forced to quickly learn about that. And so for me, that is fascinating. So for me, like, there's a lot of reasons why I did it, but these three things almost just synthesizes what drives me to actually want to continue being involved in being a board member.
That's brilliant. And like from going to, or from your roots of being a medical doctor, you've got this broad and diverse career. And I think you've touched on it to an extent, but can you give us some insights on how you went from being a medical doctor to the director of a board? You know, how easy is that transition and which skills did you find most transferable across the professions?
So I'll start by talking to the transition from being a doctor to being a non-practicing doctor. Actually, let me call it practicing doctor to non-practicing doctor, which I am now. So an MBA was critical for me in making that transition. I was practicing, I did an MBA, and having an MBA almost gave me the license to start applying for roles outside of clinical medicine. And at the time, that was, God, it was a long time ago, 2009, somewhere, yeah, 2009.
Not so long.
Thank you, Cash, not so long ago. At the time, organizations would actually look at, we want someone with an MBA? They were not saying you must have BCom plus MBA, or they were not saying have X junior degree plus MBA. An MBA in itself was an entry requirement. At the time, I was living in the UK. So that served as a brilliant transition because I was immediately compared to someone else who's an actuary or who's a whatnot, but not being compared from the basis of the skills one would have gained in their primary degrees, but from a like problem solving skills, which is what an MBA was. So for me, that was the transition. So the journey towards an MBA was not easy. And I don't want to touch on it now. We can speak about it separately. But once I had the MBA, I felt like the world opened up. I remember there was one day sitting that, oh my God, do I want to work in a bank? Or do I want to work in consulting? Or do I want to work? It actually was, it was quite a powerful moment. So anyone who wants to transition, definitely for me, I still continue to see to a certain extent, not as much as it was back then, that an MBA allows you to broker professions. And I did to entrench that further is post-MBA, I then worked in a non-clinical context. So I went full-time to being an executive in the pharmaceutical industry. And the reason why I chose pharma is I could quickly get a senior role with zero corporate experience because the background of medicine is powerful in that context. So it kind of pushed me up and allowed me to start getting into corporate at a slightly senior level. But then the change for me was working at McKinsey, working as a consultant, McKinsey Accenture. Consulting is what allows me to say it wasn't as challenging. I haven't done it another way, but I actually genuinely believe that it might not be as easy a transition as it is, because in medicine, you're trained to be in a hospital with a patient one-on-one. In corporate, you cross-collaborate, you do things differently. And the skill that for me remained transferable, which is why I'm grateful that I studied medicine, is problem-solving skills. At the heart of medicine is problem solving, nothing else. And at the heart of business, it's problem solving. So applying the frameworks and the logic that I learned in medical school still continues for me today. So again, like you almost just realize that you can actually do anything you want if you think about it. If you remove the detail and you focus on the framework and structure, it will allow you to see that you can actually navigate anything in life, because fundamentally, many of these things that I've experienced are very similar. So for me, when I think about directorship, and my journey, the combination of my skills, the fact that I am a gender that is not common in the working space, a race that is not so common again in the working space, brings a unique mix into the whole picture.
And this is, I'm going to throw one in here because it wasn't part of our preparation, but it just occurred to me, medicine has I'd like to think that our doctors have this nurturing element to their personality. They want to see people get better. They want a better society, a healthier society. Does that feature in a boardroom? Is that something that you ever find transferable to boards?
I'm actually glad you asked that, because I think I would probably describe medicine similar to what you said, and that really is about impact. I can't think of any role where every single, there's a direct link to every single step with an impact. And you wake up every day going to have an impact in somebody's life. Like that, for me, it brings it so much to life. And it's really, for me, not different from boards, right? Which is the part where being able to contribute your skills to have a broader impact is so powerful. So it is definitely transferable, Cash. And the board members that I know do partake in boards to actually have an impact. And I mean, if I talk about myself, the boards that I'm in are non-remunerative boards. I don't get paid to do it. I want to do it because I see the impact that it will have. So definitely transferable.
Okay, that's amazing, because that's the mission, right? To have people who are competent, knowledgeable, but also, I suppose, who want to make an impact, to see an impact in society. And that's what's going to drive a more ethical board. So, and you've touched on it in your previous question, but how did you reach this level of success, especially as a director, given the sector's gender gap? I mean, it's no secret, as you said, that it's not common to see women on boards. But how did you manage this, given the gender gap that exists?
I feel like though there are challenges and there's a lot that still needs to be done, I feel that I'm living in a moment where there is general recognition of the shortcomings of not having representation, inclusion, and diversity in any space, be it in a board and being in a corporate. So because that is generally acknowledged, and there are policies that actually nudge organizations to ensure that representation is there. But there's also credible research that shows that one of the best ways to optimize shareholder value is having a diverse representative board, right? And then maybe a third element as well is the stats you mentioned earlier about underrepresentation of women. Means this policy comes at a time where there's actually a very small pool of women to choose from. So I define, I would talk to say, I feel privileged that I'm in a moment where I can actually step up to fill the gap. And that's why I take it quite seriously, that it's about imparting skills, having an impact, and most importantly, showing that it's possible. So you actually even feel I don't want to say the pressure, but you feel the responsibility to actually take up these opportunities, because there aren't that many women execs, like me at least, out there. So when these opportunities come, you actually almost feel like, I actually have to find a way to make this work, because someone else out there will see that, oh, someone like me is actually doing this role, and they're actually making it work. And it allows more women to actually aspire to get to those roles, because it's also a combination of believing you can do it, starting to raise your hand, and then we'll start to also see women pushing from the bottom as policies continue to allow.
No, absolutely. And I think you do a great job at that, inspiring people. And this is, I think the Directors Association is doing a fantastic job at putting this topic front and center, so that we have professionals like yourself talk to us and inspire us to basically decide on the impact that we want to make in society, whether that be on a board or not. But it's important to decide that direction now and how you want to take that forward. So with that in mind, there is a gap, we know that, and you've been fortunate, or you say you're fortunate. I think you're gifted. You've managed to fill a gap that exists. But in filling that gap, how do you describe yourself as a director in comparison to your male counterparts? Like, what differentiates you from any male counterpart or any other board member, really, whether it be someone who's not black or not female, or, you know, what differentiates you, Musima, as a director?
So, Cash, I actually ask myself this question every single time, like when a board meeting comes up and we get a board pack and we know we have to contribute, I almost always ask myself that exact same question, because for me, answering that question allows me to connect with how am I going to represent myself in such a way that I uniquely make a contribution. So what I've realized is if I bring it back to me in the various roles that I play, skills is like a one obvious one, because as you would see in boards, there's almost one person for each role. So there's a clarity, each organization is clear that these are the key skills that we need in a board. And each person will hire a person who matches those skills. So from a skills perspective, if you are in an organization that is not purely medical and you're the medical voice and you're meant to bring that perspective. So that definitely differentiates you in how you think and some of the life experiences that you'll bring to bear. And specifically when teams are taking a slightly different strategic direction that lands up in an area where you're skilled, like that definitely would differentiate me in that perspective. But one thing is being a woman actually differentiates me. And I'm specifically saying being a woman, because I have found that being a mom has taught me so much. It has taught me so much about how to get things done when people don't want to do things. It has taught me to multitask. So I find that I'm at an advantage being a mom, because the journey, my eldest son is 13 years plus 7 years, and just juggling all of that just gives me a unique skill set that even my husband, who's a father to the same kids, actually doesn't have. So I really definitely tap into that. And the beauty in a specific example that I will give, which sits outside of the board, but like if I reflect on the work that I do, it is so gratifying when we talk about impact on children, and I can reflect life experience to my kids and make it resonate. So being a mother actually definitely differentiates me. And my interests and my personal hobbies also like definitely differentiates me. I'm a believer that every interaction in life is a learning opportunity. So I cycle a lot, I run a lot, but the journey of learning how to do that effectively is a skill that I actually bring into the boards. An example that I will give here is, I'll use cycling as an example. The fundamentals when you cycle, right, is you have got to set a goal. You've got to be clear about what that goal is. You have got to be clear about what the micro steps are that are required to get there. You also know that you cannot do it alone. So you need a team. So at any point in time, even if you have a brilliant goal and a plan, etc., you leverage the team. So like those kind of concepts that I learn in real life experience, I'm able to bring them to bear when we're engaging with the executives of the organizations that we're aboard. And you're able to explain things in a way that people make it tangible. So that definitely differentiates me, because then you don't seem like you're talking theoretically, right? And let's see, what did I mention? Motherhood, I mentioned gender, skills. And for me, again, it's just my life view that I think differentiates me. So I don't know whether it's my spirituality or is it because I'm a religious person, just a disclaimer, I am of the Christian faith, or is it because how my mom raised me? But I genuinely almost always want to connect the work that I do with the impact that it has on a person. And in boards, we're trying to maximize shareholder value, being able to bring the perspective that shareholder value is also impacting society broadly, and trying to influence strategies to make sure that the things that organizations do not only benefits the organizations on their own, but actually benefits the broader society. And helping the board and organizations to actually see that that ultimately benefits shareholders and the company is what I actually think differentiates me.
Great. No, that is brilliant insight. I was thinking on the ways that I would influence, and I'm hoping that everyone who is listening to you speak was thinking of the various ways that, and unique ways that they can contribute to the boards as you know, as individuals, as women, as professionals. Because, you know, just of the nearly 50 participants that we have, and I don't know all of you, but I know a few, There are so many skills in society. So I hope that at least or Doctor has inspired you a little bit to pursue something that is impactful in society. So we as the Directors Association are trying to redefine directorship in a sense to professionalize it. You mentioned in our conversations over this past month in preparation that people should not take lightly their commitment to a board as a director. How do you think that professionalizing directorship will assist in this regard, Doctor?
So, Cash, I absolutely agree about that, right? And how I see it adding value is because many of us that are now coming to, and becoming eligible to become members of boards have never really been previously exposed to it. We kind of have an idea of what it is, but not fully. It becomes very important for one to actually understand what are the expectations of Musima when you are being approached to be in a board. What does it mean? What are the implications? Because you ultimately are there to guard someone else's interest. So what I like about I'm seeing with organizations like yourselves and similar organizations is taking people on a journey to actually make it tangible for people to understand what it means to be on the board. What are your obligations? It's not like a fine or I'm on the board, tick. There are legal ramifications if you sign something that you did not read or did not understand and people lose money. So for me, it's just bringing to the board that it's actually a huge commitment. It's not a very light commitment. And I'm using commitment because you are liable there, but you're not directly involved in the organization, right? You've got oversight, but you're not directly involved. So it's actually a huge commitment. So realizing that and creating educational modules that expose people to what is the board structure? What are you doing? How do you make sure with the limited time that you have that not only are you able to guide the company, but you make sure that you protect the interests so that you don't find yourself in an uncomfortable position. So I actually like that. But the upside of it is then as an organization, if you're now looking for board members and you have a concern that some organizations sadly would have to say, oh, but Musima's inexperience is not young, but you'll have the that yes, she may be young, and I know she's talented, but she's actually been exposed to what it means to be in a board, how to conduct yourself in a board, how to add value when you're in a board. Therefore, they also have confidence that though like we would have hired an old male, etc. I know if I hire Musima, I would actually still add value. And this will be someone who understands their responsibility in this space.
Oh, perfect. And you know, it's not just about signing on a line, accepting a position, having a fancy title, and being able to talk about it. It's, you know, if you fail at this, or if you do something that results in you, or if you're not at all capable of doing it, you could fail yourself. You could fail the company, you could fail the rest of your board, and your colleagues, and most importantly, you end up failing society in some way. And we see that with delinquent directors that we've read about in the news. It really isn't. It's just not the right thing to do to not consider this a professional task. So to build on that discussion, Doctor, I feel that directorship is just but one of 1,000 professions that requires diversity. So we've spoken about the professional element and the knowledgeable element, but diversity is important. And I'm just going to add my little bit to this, but I think diversity is not just about, being a man or a woman. It's about being diverse in a set of skills, in thought, in mindset, which is often shaped by your background, and definitely being diverse in your leadership style. What do you think? Or why do you think, rather, that this is so important in the context of a board?
So for me, one of the most impactful scenarios where diversity comes into play, like I'm going to give an example of when you're writing a document. Let's say you're typing out a document or a letter, etc., and you've been with this document for a week and you're typing it out. You can actually say, now I'm happy, I've reviewed it 100 times, I'm going to send it. If you say, oh, let me just send it to Cash, fresh pair of eyes, Cash is going to see something that you actually have missed. That could save you an embarrassment when you had published that. I like that example because it illustrates that, remember, you are accountable and you're signing your life away on behalf of shareholders. If you don't have diversity and you have everyone who's like Musima, when this question is posed about whether this decision is risky for the business, Musima says no, but you're like, Musima, you will say no. And then you actually miss an opportunity to bring a different point of view that could have maybe highlighted a certain risk aspect that you take into account. So for me, diversity is powerful in many ways, but if I think about minimizing and limiting liabilities, allowing diverse views allow you to actually have a 360-degree view at all times when you're engaging on any issue. So that for me is quite important and quite powerful. And I feel like everybody actually aspire for that, given that we know that birds of a feather think alike. So that is absolutely critical.
Yeah, I love that. I think, and risk is my passion. So, or mitigating risk is my passion. So I think that's what you said resonates. Diversity is limiting liability, limiting risk. It's not just about having it for the show of being diverse. It actually is a functional element of the board or any profession. And so, what advice then do you give us as women, or even the men on the call? I know there are a few, so thank you for joining. What advice do you give anyone on this call in pursuing directorship in the context of embracing diversity?
So for me, the first element is you are eligible. Like there is no, I'm going to wait until XYZ until I'm eligible. Right now, as you are, wherever you are, you've got something to contribute. So remember that, because I find many people, and I used to be in that camp, and I was surprised when I was approached to apply for boards, and I'm like, but do you know me? Like, why would you think I qualified to be on a board, right? So you actually do qualify to be on a board, right? But it's still important to obviously familiarize yourself with what is required, similar to what you'll do with any role. So that's number one. Number two, find a way that resonates with you that allows you to put yourself out there. Because fortunately or unfortunately, the world is a networked place. The preference, Cash would rather go have coffee with me because she knows me than just walk into Olives and Plates and sit with a random person she's never met. And I've seen across the board, like in a perfect world where you're looking for an actuary and you know Cash, if you ask yourself genuinely, would you still like go and say, oh, I'm looking for an actuary, or would you say, Cash, I think you're suited for this role. Can I nominate you? So this is the importance of finding an authentic way to put yourself out there. People know about you. People see your skills. When these things come up, there's usually a short time frame to actually close the role. But if now people know about you, or when they search, your name comes up in one way or the other, you increase your chances of being considered. And the third thing that I want to advise, especially for us women, and I can't speak for men, but it probably applies. When you're clear about what you want to do, reach out to people and ask for advice and ask for help. You see that Musima is doing something that you're interested in, and you see that Cash is doing this. Reach out to say, this is what I'm interested in. I see that you've got XYZ interest. Can I request an opportunity to connect so I can learn XYZ? So definitely do reach out. And most importantly, when the opportunity comes, please grab it with both hands.
Yeah, well, that's valuable advice, Doctor. And I think, I'm certainly taking that, and we're fortunate enough to meet so many people in the workplace and to network in that way, but then also through organizations like this. And I think the one element that I'd like to encourage people on is join the course, take up the courses that the DA offers, the Directors Association offers, because what it's done for me is prepare me not just from, initially when I joined it, I thought, wow, how cool to be the director on a board. But really, it wasn't just that, there's so much more to it. You've got a lot of reading, you've got to know the King Code, you've got to understand a lot about governance before you just go ahead and sign up for something. So I'm very, very glad to have been a part of this journey. And I hope that more women are encouraged, or more people just generally are encouraged to professionalize their thoughts around board directorship. And then our last question, I don't want to keep anybody too long on a Friday at lunchtime, is if we are to turn the question that I just asked you around, what advice do you give people who are pursuing board or directorship? What advice would you give to a company, or, recommendations would you give to a company who's actually in search for the perfect board?
Cash, for me, I actually want to challenge organizations and individuals, myself included, we need to challenge ourselves in terms of how we get the skills that we want. I think it's okay to say I need an accountant in this role. It's okay to say I need an IT expert or someone who knows how to close a laptop. it's okay to say I need someone who has worked in the medical industry. So that foundation is clear. But in terms of the how we get the individuals, I just have believe that the current way of getting the talent into where these opportunities are has got a lot of flaws, has got a lot of biases, and hence you end up seeing the same people circulating. And for me, like, people circulating doesn't mean there aren't tons of skilled people out there. It just says there's something fundamentally flawed with the process. So I completely want to challenge organizations because the value of diversity is there, right? From gender, skills, etc. perspective, and it's actually required for boards. So I actually would challenge them to say, start piloting ways to bring in fresh voices onto the table, because that will move your organization forward. And you're seeing some organizations starting to do that, where you can recruit via nomination, or you can start getting an agency to help you do that. The board has got this incredible process, which I like, in terms of trying to get fresh ideas on the board. I sit in the nomination committee for new board members. So what we do is we define the skills. We look at best practice literature to say what defines a highly functioning board, and we list all those things. And it's a global board. So location, age, gender, skill, industry. So we list all of that. And when we look at candidates, and we invite everyone on the board and everyone on the exec, send any name that meets this criteria, anybody, anywhere. And what we become clear about is, okay, we definitely would put high on the agenda India, because there's no one from India, or Africa, because there's no one from Africa, or Black young woman, because there's no Black young woman, and we define young. And I've seen that, like, black and white process force transformation completely. Because if I want to nominate Cash, but the priority is like, we definitely want a white American male. It doesn't mean Cash is not brilliant. It means right now, we see the white American male. So, and this is actually how I got to be on the board. There were other brilliant people, but at the time, they're looking for health industry expert, because the person who was rotating had a similar profile to mine, but had to rotate out of the board, because after 2 terms, you rotate out. They realized that they have got huge presence on the African continent, but have never had a clinical board director from the African continent. So they were intent that we've got to have that. And like the point I was making earlier, there aren't many. So I made it into a short list and ultimately was on the board. But if they hadn't done that and they asked the board member to say, oh, do you know a healthcare doctor with business experience across the globe with 7 billion people, that's probably not going to make the cut. So for me, challenging ways of recruiting and being intentional about bringing fresh voices and fresh faces onto the board table should be a priority for organizations.
Oh, that's perfect. And I think, turning that around, it is definitely a responsibility of the companies that surround us, of the organizations that surround us and build our society, to ensure that diversity is an element that they're thinking about. And like I said again, diversity in the sense is not just, yes, we're in Women's Month, and yes, it brings up the theme. But both Dr. and myself have been talking, and diversity is so much more than just man, woman, black, white. It's literally about having people with different mindsets, different viewpoints, fresh faces, fresh voices. And that strengthens the team, that builds a society. And so, yeah, that's basically where we've thought to end this discussion. But of course, we are left with a little bit of time. So I'll open it up for 5 minutes if anyone has any comments or questions for Dr. Musima or myself. Yeah, let's. Manku, I see you've got your hand raised.
Thank you so much, Cash, and good day to you, Dr. Musima and the ladies. I just wanted to find out from Dr. Musima, when she was talking about the issue of diversity in the boards and how the boards would actually, she would advise that, boards get a fresh perspective and all that. Now, what happens in a case where you've got a candidate who education-wise is not a professional in that particular field, but that person has an experience? Would you recommend such a person, or will you simply say, no, we actually want a CA for this particular position? So despite the fact that the person has been working in a financial industry, but is not a CA, how are you going to navigate that? I hope it's clear now.
Thanks for the question. That's actually a very important question. So boards are regulated in terms of what the person should have and look like and be qualified in. Most of that is actually prescriptive in a way. So I haven't specifically would have looked at the finance thing, but if I reflect on our board, for example, and it's governed by, it's a global board, but governed by US rules. In the finance role, whether we like it or not, the person must, the regulation stipulates that the person must have the qualification. So there are roles that are stipulated. However, having said that, there are roles that are not stipulated where you can hire as per what you need. That's like in formal organizations. There's also other boards that I sit in, not corporate boards, like Indlela that Cash mentioned, where because of the needs of a board, in that kind of setting, there's a need for them to have people that don't have formal academic qualification, but maybe a skill they're looking for is someone who has experience being in a specific community they're targeting. So if you feel like you come across board roles that require a specific qualification, it's probably because it's regulated, but that doesn't mean you can't participate in a board. There are equally organizations that might have a different need that doesn't require an MBCHB or an actuarial degree. And you can apply for those roles in whatever space that they're looking for, but you still get to apply your other skills. And then what that does is, even though, let's just say you're interested in finance and you join a board like Indlela, where they're looking for people with in a community where you happen to live, there will be a finance committee. And then you raise your hand because you're already in the board interested in finance, then you join the finance committee. So I would encourage you to triangulate if you're interested in being on a board. Triangulate what is your best, what is your unique contribution that will allow you to stand out in that board application. And find, once you're in the board, then it's easy to find yourself gravitating towards an area you're interested in.
Great. Anku, does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you very much.
Okay, wonderful. I don't see any other hands up, and the comments are really all favorable. It's really a pleasure to do something like this. So thank you all for joining. There are no further questions, so we'll end the session here. But if you do have, think of something afterwards, my contact details are with Munya. You're more than welcome to reach out. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for having me. Have a great weekend.
Thank you. Bye.
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 Thank you.
Thank you.